The blood-stained bank note felt as heavy as a tombstone in Eliza Sommers' trembling hand, as Sheriff Donovan held it up for the entire town to see. The year was 1878, and Montana City was crying out for justice with her neck as payment. Found in her satchel. Sheriff Donovan bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowded town square where what seemed like all 3,000 residents of Montana City had gathered under the unforgiving June sun. The very same bills stolen from the bank vault the night Mr. Tucker was murdered. Eliza stood on the wooden platform that had been hastily erected in front of the courthouse, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. Her honey-brown hair hung in limp strands around her pale face, and her blue calico dress, once her Sunday best, was soiled from 3 days in the town jail. At 22, she had never imagined her life would end like this, accused of a murder she didn't commit in a town she'd only called home for 8 months. "I didn't kill anyone," Eliza said, her voice cracking. "I didn't take that money. Someone put it in my things." Her protests were drowned out by the angry shouts from the crowd. Montana City had been good to her when she'd arrived last October, taking a position as the schoolteacher after the previous one had run off with a traveling salesman. The people had welcomed her warmly enough, but now those same faces were contorted with rage, calling for her to swing for a crime she knew nothing about. "Order!" Judge Harmon pounded his gavel, though the hungry mob barely quieted. "This court finds sufficient evidence to hold Eliza Sommers for trial on the charges of robbery and the murder of Franklin Tucker, banker and citizen of Montana City." Eliza's knees nearly buckled. Franklin Tucker had been kind to her, helping her secure a small loan to establish herself in town when she'd first arrived. The idea that anyone thought she could have shot him in cold blood during a robbery made her stomach turn. "Trial to commence Monday next," Judge Harmon continued, his bushy gray eyebrows furrowing. "Until then, the prisoner will remain in custody." "Why wait for a trial?" someone shouted from the crowd. "We all know she did it. Hang her now," came another voice, followed by a chorus of agreement. The sheriff raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Now, folks, we're a town of law. Judge says there'll be a trial, so there'll be a trial." Eliza caught sight of Mary Wilson, the milliner who'd become her closest friend in town, standing near the back of the crowd. Mary's face was twisted with anguish, but she made no move to defend Eliza. No one did. As the sheriff guided her down the steps of the platform, Eliza's gaze swept over the angry faces. Then she saw him, a man she didn't recognize, leaning against the hitching post outside the general store. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking out beneath a dust-covered Stetson, he studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Unlike the others, his expression wasn't hostile, but calculating, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "Keep moving," Sheriff Donovan muttered, giving her a not quite gentle push toward the jailhouse. As she stumbled forward, she heard a deep voice rise above the crowd's murmurs. "I know who really did it." The words silenced the crowd instantly. Every head turned toward the stranger who had now pushed his way through the throng, spurs jangling with each deliberate step. Sheriff Donovan's hand moved instinctively to his pistol. "And who might you be, mister?" The stranger stepped into a shaft of sunlight, revealing a weathered face with several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Lucas Calloway," he said, removing his hat in a gesture that might have been respectful under different circumstances. "And I'm telling you, this woman didn't kill Franklin Tucker." "You got proof of that bold claim?" Judge Harmon called from the platform. Lucas Calloway's lips curved into a grim smile. "Better. I know who did, and I can prove it if you give me 3 days." "This is nonsense," shouted Harold Pierce, the owner of the town's mercantile and one of Tucker's closest friends. "We don't know this man. Why should we listen to him?" Sheriff Donovan held up a hand. "Where you from, Calloway?" "Been riding circuit as a marshal out of Denver," Lucas replied, reaching slowly into his vest to produce a silver star. "Tracking a gang that's hit banks across 3 territories. Your banker Tucker wasn't their first victim." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the crowd. Eliza felt a spark of hope flare in her chest for the first time since she'd been dragged from her small boarding house room in the middle of the night, accused of a crime she couldn't comprehend. Judge Harmon stroked his beard thoughtfully. 3 days, you say?" "That's all I need," Lucas affirmed. "Keep the lady locked up if you must, but if you hang her before I can show you what I know, you'll be sending an innocent woman to her death." The judge and sheriff exchanged looks. Finally, Judge Harmon nodded. 3 days, Marshal. "But the trial proceeds as scheduled unless you bring me proof that can't be denied." As Sheriff Donovan resumed leading her to the jail, Eliza caught Lucas Calloway's gaze again. He gave her a slight nod, as if making her a silent promise. She wanted desperately to believe him, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere to defend her. But as the heavy jail door clanged shut behind her, Eliza Sommers wondered if this brief reprieve was merely delaying the inevitable. Montana City had already decided her fate, and one lone marshal might not be enough to change it. Eliza paced the small confines of her cell, her skirts swishing against the rough wooden floorboards. The jailhouse was stifling, the summer heat trapped beneath the low ceiling with only one barred window allowing a meager breeze. Outside, she could hear the normal bustle of the town resuming, though now punctuated with angry voices discussing her supposed crimes. Sheriff Donovan sat at his desk, methodically cleaning his revolver while keeping a watchful eye on her. He wasn't an unkind man. He'd brought her extra water and a somewhat clean blanket for her narrow cot, but he was convinced of her guilt like everyone else. "Mr. Donovan," she ventured, gripping the iron bars, "may I ask you something?" He looked up, his weathered face impassive. "Suppose so. This marshal, Calloway, do you think he's telling the truth?" The sheriff set his cleaning rag down. "Don't know. But I've heard rumors about a gang hitting banks through Colorado and Wyoming. 3 men, maybe 4. Leave no witnesses." He shrugged. "Still don't explain how those bills ended up in your possession, Miss Sommers." "Because someone put them there," she insisted, not for the first time. "I would never hurt Mr. Tucker. He was kind to me." Sheriff Donovan sighed. "Well, Marshal Calloway's got 3 days to prove that. Best not pin your hopes too high, though. Man might just be blowing smoke." The outer door swung open, cutting off further conversation. Lucas Calloway filled the doorframe, somehow looking even taller than he had in the town square. He'd removed his duster, revealing a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to expose tanned forearms and a worn leather vest. His gun belt was tied low on his hips, suggesting a man comfortable with its weight. "Sheriff," he nodded, then turned his attention to Eliza. Something in his gaze softened slightly. "Miss Sommers." "Marshal," she replied, searching his face for any hint that he truly could save her from the gallows. "I don't understand why you're helping me." "Because you're innocent," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He turned back to the sheriff. "Need to ask her some questions. Alone, if possible." Sheriff Donovan frowned. "Against regulations." Lucas leaned in, his voice lowered. "Sheriff, I've been tracking this gang for 8 months across 3 territories. 5 banks robbed, 7 men dead. If they're who I think they are, you're gonna want what I know." The sheriff's resistance visibly wavered. 5 minutes, he conceded, rising from his chair. "I'll be right outside that door." When they were alone, Lucas approached Eliza's cell, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. Up close, she could see the fine lines at their corners. He was perhaps 30, she guessed, though the harshness of life on the frontier aged a man quickly. "Why do you believe I'm innocent?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone else in town seems convinced I'm a killer." "Because I know what a killer looks like," he replied, his voice rough-edged but quiet. "And because the way they found that money, it's too neat, too convenient." Eliza moved closer to the bars. "I came here to teach school," she said. "My father died last year in St. Louis. He was a professor. I had nowhere else to go, so when I saw the advertisement for a teacher here, I took the position. I barely knew Mr. Tucker, except that he helped arrange my salary with the town council." Lucas nodded. "Tell me about the day of the murder." "It was Tuesday. I taught until 3 o'clock, then visited Mary Wilson. She owns the millinery shop, for tea. After that, I went to my room at Mrs. Abbott's boarding house to prepare lessons for the next day. I had supper there at 6, then retired early with a headache." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know anything had happened until Sheriff Donovan pounded on my door near midnight, saying they needed to search my room. That's when they found the money in my satchel. But I never put it there, I swear it." "Anyone see you at the boarding house between your return and supper?" She thought for a moment. "Mrs. Abbott brought me willow bark tea for my headache around 5. And I believe Mr. Peterson, he's the telegraph operator, was in the parlor when I came down for supper." Lucas scratched his stubbled jaw. Not much of an alibi for the time of the robbery. "Bank was hit just after 5, according to what I've gathered." "But I didn't do it," Eliza said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Why would anyone believe I could shoot a man and rob a bank?" "Someone wants the town to believe it," Lucas replied. "That's what matters." He glanced toward the door. "I don't have much time. Is there anything at all unusual you've noticed in town recently? New faces? Old acquaintances showing up unexpectedly?" Eliza shook her head, then paused. "Wait, there was a man. I'd seen him watching the school several times in the past week. I thought perhaps he had children he was considering enrolling, but he never approached me. Dark hair, a scar along his jawline. I mentioned him to Mary once." Lucas's expression sharpened. "Describe the scar." "Thin, white. From his ear almost to his chin on the left side." She saw recognition flash in his eyes before he carefully masked it. "That's helpful," was all he said. "Miss Sommers, I'm going to find out who did this, but I need you to be careful about what you say and to whom. These men, if they're who I think, they don't leave loose ends." The implication chilled her. "You think they meant to frame me from the beginning? Why me? Newcomer to town, living alone, no family connections here, makes you an easy target." His expression darkened. "And if you'd been hanged quickly, there'd be no one to question their version of events before they moved on to the next town." The door opened as Sheriff Donovan returned. "Time's up, Marshal." Lucas nodded, then turned back to Eliza. "I'll be back tomorrow. Try to remember anything else that seemed odd, no matter how small." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Marshal Calloway." He looked back. "Thank you for believing me." Something passed across his face, not quite a smile, but a softening. Then he settled his hat on his head with a nod and was gone. Eliza returned to her cot, her mind racing. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something other than despair. Lucas Calloway seemed to genuinely believe in her innocence, and more importantly, seemed capable of proving it. But 3 days wasn't much time, and Montana City's appetite for justice or vengeance was growing by the hour. Lucas exited the jailhouse and paused on the wooden sidewalk, scanning the main street of Montana City with careful eyes. The town was typical of those springing up throughout the Montana Territory, a main street lined with wooden buildings, some ornately fronted to project prosperity, others plain and utilitarian. The bank where Franklin Tucker had been murdered stood at the far end, its door still wrapped with black crepe in mourning. He made his way toward it, ignoring the suspicious glances from townspeople who had witnessed his interruption of what they'd hoped would be swift justice. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as he approached the Montana City Bank and Trust, its freshly painted sign at odds with the bloodstains still visible on the boardwalk, despite someone's efforts to scrub them away. Inside, a young man with a clerk's visor looked up nervously from his ledger. The bank was empty of customers. The recent violence had clearly made people wary. "Can I help you, sir?" the clerk asked, his voice cracking slightly. Lucas showed his marshal's badge. "Hear about the robbery? You working when it happened?" The young man swallowed visibly. "No, sir." That was Mr. Parsons, the head teller. He's not back yet. Pretty shaken up seeing Mr. Tucker shot like that. "Where can I find Parsons?" "Lives above the apothecary. Been there since it happened, taking laudanum for his nerves from what I hear." Lucas nodded. "Show me where it happened." The clerk hesitantly led Lucas around the counter and toward the back of the bank. "Mr. Tucker was at his desk here," he explained, pointing to a large oak desk still positioned in front of an open vault door. Mr. Parsons said 3 men came in just as they were closing, wore bandanas over their faces. One held a gun on him at the counter. The other 2 took Mr. Tucker back here to open the safe. And then, Mr. Tucker must have tried to be brave. They shot him point blank, took what they could carry, and ran out the back door. The clerk pointed to a narrow exit that led to an alley behind the bank. Lucas examined the area carefully. "Parsons saw all this. That's what he said. Said he was so scared he just crouched behind the counter until it was over, then ran for the sheriff." Something didn't add up. Lucas walked to the vault, noting the heavy door and the complex lock. "No signs of force on this lock. Tucker opened it willingly," the clerk shrugged. "Must have under threat." "How much was taken?" Mr. Tucker was the only one who knew exactly what was in there, but Mr. Parsons estimated about $8,000, mostly in large bills. Lucas's eyebrows rose. "That's a lot of cash for a town this size." "Mining payroll came through the day before," the clerk explained, "for the Blackwater mine outside town." "And how much was found on the schoolteacher?" The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Just 500. Sheriff figures she must have hidden the rest somewhere." Or there never was more, Lucas thought but didn't say. "Anyone check the serial numbers on those bills against bank records?" I don't know, sir." Lucas made a mental note to ask the sheriff that very question. "Take me to see Parsons." 20 minutes later, Lucas was knocking on the door of a small apartment above Nielsen's apothecary. The door cracked open to reveal a thin-faced man with receding hair and spectacles perched on a long nose. "Herbert Parsons?" Lucas asked. The man nodded nervously. "Marshal Lucas Calloway. Need to ask you about the robbery." Parsons glanced anxiously down the hallway as if looking for escape. "I've already told Sheriff Donovan everything." "Tell me again," Lucas insisted, his foot subtly blocking the door from closing. Reluctantly, Parsons let him in. The small apartment was cluttered with books and papers, and the distinct smell of medicinal tinctures hung in the air. Parsons gestured weakly to a chair while he perched on the edge of his bed. "It was just before closing," he began, his fingers fidgeting with a handkerchief. 3 men came in, faces covered. One stayed with me, kept his gun on me the whole time, told me not to move or make a sound. The others took Mr. Tucker to the vault. "Could you see what happened next?" Parsons shook his head. "I was behind the counter. But I heard Mr. Tucker protesting, then a gunshot. I was so frightened I couldn't move. When I finally looked up, they were gone out the back, and poor Mr. Tucker. His voice broke. Blood everywhere. Lucas studied the man carefully. Described the men. As I said, they wore bandanas. All I could see were their eyes. Height, build, anything distinctive. Parsons dabbed his forehead with the handkerchief. Average height, I suppose. The one who watched me had dark eyes. Mean eyes, I'll never forget them. Any of them have a scar along the jaw, perhaps. Parsons's reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight widening of the eyes, quickly controlled. I don't recall. As I said, they wore bandanas. Lucas let the silence stretch, a tactic that often made nervous men reveal more than they intended. Is it true what they're saying? Parsons finally asked. That you don't think the school teacher did it. Miss Sommers is innocent, Lucas stated flatly, and I intend to prove it. But the money they found was planted. Lucas cut him off. Tell me, Mr. Parsons, how long have you worked at the bank? 15 years. Mr. Tucker hired me when he first opened it. And in all that time, did he ever mention having enemies? Anyone who might want to see him dead? Parsons shook his head too quickly. Everyone respected Mr. Tucker. He was a pillar of the community. Lucas stood, towering over the seated bank teller. Mr. Parsons, I'm going to find who really killed Franklin Tucker. When I do, anyone who helped them or lied about what happened will hang alongside them. You understand me? The teller's face had gone ash white. I've told you what I know, Marshal. Now, if you'll excuse me, my nerves. Lucas left Parsons reaching shakily for a small brown bottle, his suspicions growing by the minute. Something wasn't right about the teller's story, but he needed more before he could act on his instincts. His next stop was the millinery shop owned by Mary Wilson, the friend Eliza had mentioned. The bell tinkled cheerfully as he entered, at odds with the somber woman who looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. Lucas introduced himself. "You're friends with Eliza Sommers." It wasn't a question, but Mary's face crumpled slightly at the name. "I was, before all this." "You don't believe she did it?" Mary touched a display of ribbons absently. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Eliza isn't the type to hurt anyone, let alone rob a bank. But they found that money." "Tell me about her," Lucas pressed. "Has she been acting strangely, secretive?" "No, nothing like that. She's been the same as always, dedicated to her students, always reading, saving her money carefully." Mary hesitated. Although what? She did mention a man watching the schoolhouse, said he made her uncomfortable. Lucas nodded. "She told me. Did you ever see him yourself?" "Once. He was across the street when I walked her home from tea last week." Tall fellow, well-dressed but somehow menacing. Mary shivered at the memory. "I told her to tell the sheriff, but she thought she was being silly, imagining things." "This man, did he have a scar on his face, left side?" Mary's eyes widened. "Yes, how did you know?" Lucas felt a grim satisfaction. "Because I've been tracking him and his partners for months. Name's Rafe Donner. He and his brother Wesley, along with a third man, have been robbing banks across the territories. And you think they framed Eliza. But why? That's what I need to find out." Lucas moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, have you noticed anyone new in town besides these men? Anyone who seemed to take a particular interest in the bank or in Franklin Tucker?" Mary thought for a moment. "There was a woman who came through about 2 weeks ago. Stylish from back east by her clothes and manner. She asked directions to the bank, said she had business with Mr. Tucker. Did you get her name?" She didn't offer it. "But she was staying at the hotel. Quite beautiful, dark hair, expensive clothes, caused quite a stir among the local men." Lucas filed this information away. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. You've been more help than you know." His next destination was the hotel, but as he stepped back onto the main street, he noticed 3 riders approaching from the east end of town. Something about their bearing made his hand instinctively move closer to his gun. As they drew nearer, he recognized the man in the center immediately, Wesley Donner, the older of the brothers, with a distinctive red beard and a missing earlobe from a previous encounter with the law. Lucas stepped back into the shadow of the millinery shop's awning, watching as the three men dismounted in front of the saloon. If the Donner brothers were brazenly returning to town after the robbery, it could only mean one thing: they had unfinished business here. And Eliza Sommers, the only person who could identify at least one of them, was conveniently locked up and facing a hangman's noose. Lucas knew he needed to move carefully. If he confronted them now, he risked a shootout in the middle of town with no proof to convince the locals who the real criminals were. But if he waited, Eliza might run out of time. He needed to find out who the mysterious woman was who had visited Tucker, locate the missing money, and determine why the Donner gang had chosen this particular bank and this particular schoolteacher to frame. All before Eliza Sommers faced a jury already convinced of her guilt. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Montana City, Lucas Calloway began to formulate a plan. It was risky, but with Eliza's life hanging in the balance, he had no choice but to play this dangerous game and win. Eliza startled awake from a fitful doze as the jail door creaked open. The shadows in her cell had lengthened, suggesting several hours had passed since Lucas Calloway's visit. To her surprise, it was Mary Wilson who entered, carrying a covered basket and looking nervously over her shoulder. "Sheriff said I could bring you some supper," Mary explained, her voice hushed, "and clean clothes for tomorrow." Eliza approached the bars, relief washing over her at the sight of a friendly face. "Mary, I can't tell you what this means to me." The sheriff unlocked the cell door just enough for Mary to pass the basket through. 10 minutes, he grunted, returning to his desk where he made a show of focusing on paperwork while keeping them in his peripheral vision. Mary waited until he seemed absorbed in his task before leaning closer. "The marshal came to see me," she whispered. "He's been asking all over town about the robbery." Hope fluttered in Eliza's chest. "Does he really think he can prove I didn't do it?" "He seems determined." Mary glanced toward the sheriff, then lowered her voice further. "Eliza, he asked about that man you saw watching the school. Said his name is Rafe Donner and he's part of a gang that's robbed other banks." Eliza's eyes widened. "So I was right, someone did plant that money to frame me." "It seems so." Mary hesitated. "But there's more. The marshal was watching the saloon when I left my shop. Those men, the Donner gang, they're in town right now." A chill ran down Eliza's spine. "Here. Why would they come back?" "I don't know. But the marshal told me to tell you to be careful what you say, even to me." Mary's expression was troubled. "He thinks someone in town might be helping them." Eliza processed this, her mind racing. "Did he say who?" Mary shook her head. "But he did ask if I'd seen any strangers in town before the robbery." "I mentioned that woman who came asking for Mr. Tucker at the bank a couple weeks ago." "What woman?" "You wouldn't have seen her. She was only here for 2 days while you were home with that cold. Elegant lady, not the type we usually see in Montana City." "I assumed she was a relative or perhaps a bank investor." Sheriff Donovan cleared his throat loudly. "Time's about up, Mrs. Wilson." Mary squeezed Eliza's hand through the bars. "Stay strong. The marshal seems capable. If anyone can help you, I think he can." After Mary left, Eliza sat on her cot and opened the basket. Inside, she found a cloth-wrapped parcel of fried chicken and biscuits, a clean shirtwaist and skirt, and tucked beneath them all, a folded note. She quickly concealed it in her palm, waiting until the sheriff stepped outside to speak with a deputy before unfolding it. The handwriting was bold and masculine. "Watch for my signal after dark. Be ready." It was unsigned, but she knew instinctively it was from Lucas. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was he planning to break her out of jail? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. If they were caught, he would face prison, and she would certainly hang. But if the Donner gang was indeed in town, perhaps they posed an even greater threat. As darkness fell, Eliza pretended to sleep while her every sense remained alert. Sheriff Donovan lit the oil lamps, checked her cell once more, then settled into the chair behind his desk with a cup of coffee, his shotgun propped against the wall beside him. The hours crept by. The town grew quiet except for occasional bursts of laughter and piano music from the saloon down the street. The sheriff's head began to nod, though he jerked awake periodically to check that she was still in her cell. Just after midnight, Eliza heard it 3 soft taps on the window at the back of the jailhouse, followed by 2 more. She remained motionless, feigning sleep, but her mind raced. What was Lucas planning? Her question was answered moments later when the front door burst open. A disheveled young man rushed in, startling the sheriff fully awake. "Sheriff, fight at the saloon, Donner gang's tearing the place apart. Marshal Calloway's outnumbered." Sheriff Donovan jumped to his feet, grabbing his shotgun. "Damn it, Peterson, you stay here and watch the prisoner." The young man the telegraph operator Eliza had mentioned to Lucas nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. No one gets in or out." The sheriff rushed out, and the moment the door closed behind him, Peterson's demeanor changed entirely. He moved swiftly to her cell, producing a key from his pocket. "Marshal says to hurry," he whispered, unlocking the door. "He's created a diversion, but it won't last long." Eliza hesitated. "If I escape, they'll just think I'm guilty for certain." "It's not an escape," Peterson assured her. "It's protection. The marshal says the Donners know you can identify one of them. They're planning to silence you before you can testify." That decided her. Eliza grabbed Mary's basket with the clean clothes and followed Peterson to the back door of the jailhouse. He peered out cautiously, then nodded. "Coast is clear. Marshal Calloway will meet you behind the livery stable. Stay in the shadows." Heart pounding, Eliza slipped out into the night. Montana City was eerily silent now, save for the distant commotion from the saloon. She kept to the darkest parts of the alleys, working her way toward the livery stable at the edge of town. She had nearly reached it when a figure stepped out from between 2 buildings. Eliza froze, terrified it was one of the Donners, but then recognized the lean silhouette of Lucas Calloway. "You made it," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "Follow me, quickly." He led her behind the stable where 2 horses were already saddled. "Can you ride astride?" he asked, eyeing her skirts. "If necessary," she replied, gathering the fabric as best she could. Lucas helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse, a powerful buckskin gelding that seemed eager to run. "We'll head into the foothills," he explained in hushed tones. "I've found a place where you'll be safe until I can gather the evidence we need." "What about the diversion? Won't someone get hurt?" Lucas's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "The fight was mostly for show. I paid a couple of miners to start yelling about being cheated at cards. The Donners weren't even there. They're holed up at a line shack outside town." "Then how do you know they want to silence me?" "Because I overheard Wesley Donner at the general store this afternoon, asking pointed questions about the jail's security and when your trial was set to begin." His expression darkened. "They weren't planning to let you make it to Monday." As they rode out of town, staying off the main roads and keeping to the shelter of the tree line, Eliza felt a confusing mix of emotions: fear at being a fugitive, relief at being free from her cell, and an unexpected sense of security in Lucas Calloway's presence. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked as they ascended into the pine-covered foothills east of town. "Old Trapper's cabin about 10 miles out. Lucas replied. Been abandoned for years, but it's weathertight and hidden from the main trails. Found it while tracking the Donners yesterday. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the moon occasionally breaking through the clouds to light their way. Finally, Lucas guided them up a nearly invisible path that wound through a dense stand of pines. The cabin appeared suddenly a small, sturdy structure of logs and stone, tucked against the hillside as if it had grown there naturally. Lucas dismounted first, then helped Eliza down. Her legs were stiff from the unaccustomed riding position, and she stumbled slightly against him. His hands steadied her, strong and warm against her waist, and for a moment they stood too close in the moonlight. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks as she stepped back. "Thank you," she murmured, uncertain if she was thanking him for the assistance or for everything else he'd done. Lucas cleared his throat and turned to secure the horses. "Let's get inside. It'll be cold up here once the night air really sets in." The cabin was Spartan but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot in one corner. Lucas quickly built a fire, and soon the small space was filled with warm, flickering light. "It's not much," he apologized, setting a pot of coffee to boil on the small, pot-bellied stove. "It's not a jail cell," Eliza countered with a weak smile, sitting at the table. "I'm grateful." Lucas settled into the chair opposite her. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the perpetual furrow between his brows less pronounced. "Tomorrow I'll head back into town," he explained. "Need to find out more about that woman who visited Tucker before the robbery. And I need to search Parsons's quarters. The bank teller, you think he's involved? His story doesn't add up. Says he couldn't see the vault from his position, yet he knew exactly how Tucker was shot. Claims 3 men came in, but only describes one in any detail." Lucas shook his head. "And he got nervous when I mentioned the scar. But why would a bank teller conspire with outlaws to rob his own bank? Money, revenge, or maybe he didn't have a choice." Lucas poured them each a cup of the now boiling coffee. "What about Tucker himself? Did he ever mention anything unusual to you about the bank, or about his personal affairs?" Eliza warmed her hands on the tin cup. "No, though we weren't close. He was polite whenever we met, but mostly our interactions were formal about my position, my salary." She paused. "Actually, there was one odd thing. About a month ago he asked if I'd had any correspondence from back east, specifically from St. Louis. Said a letter might come for me that was actually meant for him." Lucas's eyebrows rose. "Did such a letter ever arrive?" "No. I asked him to explain, but he brushed it off, said it was a misunderstanding." "St. Louis," Lucas mused. "That's where you're from originally." Eliza nodded. "My father taught mathematics at the university there. After he died, I couldn't afford to keep our home." The memory still ached. "I saw the advertisement for a teacher here and thought it would be a fresh start." Lucas watched her carefully. "Could Tucker have known your father, or known of him?" "I don't see how. Papa rarely left St. Louis, and Montana City seems an unlikely destination for a banker to have connections." She frowned thoughtfully. "Unless Papa did correspond with other mathematicians and scholars. He published several papers on numerical theory." "A mathematician," Lucas repeated slowly. "And a banker who might have been expecting correspondence from St. Louis that could be mistaken for a letter to you." His eyes took on a keen, focused look that Eliza was beginning to recognize as his investigative instinct. "We need to find out more about Tucker's background. And about this mystery woman." Eliza stifled a yawn, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Lucas noticed immediately. "You should rest," he said, standing. "Take the cot, I'll keep watch." "But you need sleep too," she protested. "I've gone longer without," he assured her. I'll catch some sleep in the chair." Too tired to argue further, Eliza moved to the cot. Lucas handed her the blanket he'd brought in his saddlebags. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and again she felt that peculiar flutter in her chest. "Marshal Calloway," she said softly as she settled onto the cot. "Why are you risking so much for me? You don't even know me." Lucas stood by the fire, his face half in shadow. For a long moment he was silent, and Eliza thought he might not answer. "I know what it's like to be judged guilty when you're innocent," he finally said, his voice low and rough with some emotion she couldn't quite identify. "To have no one believe you when you're telling the truth." She wanted to ask more about what had happened to him, about who had wronged him, but the weariness was overwhelming, and before she could form the question, sleep claimed her. Lucas watched as Eliza's breathing deepened and evened out. In sleep, the worry lines that had marked her face in the jailhouse faded, revealing the natural beauty that stress and fear had temporarily masked. Her honey-brown hair spilled across the rough pillow, and one hand curled beneath her cheek like a child's. He turned away, uncomfortable with the protective surge he felt watching her. He'd taken this case because it was part of his pursuit of the Donner gang, not because of any personal interest in Eliza Sommers. At least, that's what he'd told himself. Yet when he'd seen her on that platform, dignity intact despite her circumstances, something had compelled him to speak up. Perhaps it was because he recognized the look of someone falsely accused, fighting against a tide of condemnation. He knew that look intimately, had seen it in his own reflection years ago. Lucas added another log to the fire and settled into the chair, his gun within easy reach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, at least, Eliza Sommers was safe. And somehow, that knowledge brought him more peace than he'd felt in a very long time. Dawn broke over the foothills, filtering through the cabin's single window in pale gold streaks. Eliza stirred, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings until the events of the previous day rushed back. She sat up quickly, looking for Lucas. He was already awake, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something beyond the landscape. He'd shaved, she noticed, the strong line of his jaw now clean of stubble, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "You're awake," he said, turning as she swung her legs over the edge of the cot. "Coffee's hot." "Thank you." Eliza smoothed her rumpled skirts, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after a night of sleep in her clothes. I'd like to change if I could have some privacy." Lucas nodded, setting down his cup. "I'll check on the horses." Once alone, Eliza quickly changed into the clean clothes Mary had provided, a serviceable navy skirt and white shirtwaist. She used a small amount of water from the bucket by the stove to wash her face and hands, then braided her hair as neatly as possible without a mirror. When Lucas returned, he paused in the doorway, something in his expression shifting as he took in her refreshed appearance. "Feel better, much," she admitted, accepting the coffee he offered. "What happens now?" Lucas sat across from her, his expression turning serious. "I ride back to town alone. You stay here out of sight. For how long? Until I can prove your innocence, or at least until I can identify who's really behind Tucker's murder." He leaned forward. "The Donners are dangerous, but they're not the masterminds here. Someone hired them. Someone who knew enough about you to make you the perfect scapegoat." Eliza considered this. "The mysterious woman at the hotel, possibly. I intend to find out." He rose and collected his hat and gun belt. "There's food in the cupboard, enough for a few days. Keep the door barred, and don't light the fire during daylight hours. Smoke can be seen for miles up here." The reality of being left alone suddenly struck her. "What if something happens to you?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Peterson knows where this cabin is. If I don't return by tomorrow night, he'll come for you. Lucas checked his revolver, then slid it into his holster. But I'll be back. He said it with such certainty that Eliza found herself believing him, despite the danger he was riding into. Be careful, she said as he moved toward the door. These people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again. Lucas paused, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost impulsive, he reached out and briefly touched her cheek. Lock the door behind me. And then he was gone, leaving Eliza with the ghost of his touch on her skin and a fluttering heart that had nothing to do with fear. Lucas rode into Montana City, just as the church bells were ringing for Sunday services. The town was in its Sunday best, men in dark suits and women in modest finery making their way to the white clapboard church at the end of Main Street. He tethered his horse behind the hotel, out of sight, and made his way to the telegraph office where Peterson was just opening up. "Any trouble after I left?" Lucas asked without preamble. Peterson shook his head. "Sheriff was hopping mad when he realized she was gone, but I played dumb, said I heard a commotion out back, and when I checked, she must have slipped out. He's got a search party combing the hills north of town." "Good, keep them looking in the wrong direction." Lucas glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I need information about a female visitor to town about 2 weeks ago, stayed at the hotel. Well-dressed, dark-haired, had business with Tucker." Peterson frowned thoughtfully. "That would be Mrs. Lawrence. Sent several telegrams while she was here to Denver and St. Louis, if I recall correctly." Lucas's interest sharpened. "You remember what they said?" "No, sir. Confidential, you understand, but—" Peterson lowered his voice. "She did receive one that upset her greatly. Read it right here at the counter and went white as a sheet, nearly ran from the office." "When was this?" "Day before she left town. Same day she had a long meeting with Mr. Tucker at the bank." Peterson hesitated. "There was talk. Not that I listened to gossip, you understand, but Mrs. Abernathy at the hotel said Mrs. Lawrence and Mr. Tucker seemed unusually familiar for business acquaintances." Lucas processed this. "I need to see the hotel register from when she stayed, and I need to know if she left any belongings behind, or if anyone knows where she went after here." Peterson nodded. "Mrs. Abernathy might help with that. She's at church now, but should be back at the hotel by noon." "One more thing," Lucas added. "Has anyone been asking about Miss Sommers' whereabouts, besides the sheriff, I mean?" "The Donner brothers came by last night, claimed to be concerned citizens wanting to help with the search." Peterson grimaced. "Gave me the creeps, the way they were asking about her, like they were hunting, not helping." Lucas wasn't surprised. "If they come back, tell them the search parties have found signs she might be heading for the territorial border." After leaving Peterson, Lucas made his way to the bank. It was closed, of course, being Sunday, but that suited his purposes. He circled to the alley behind it, finding the back door secured with a simple lock that posed little challenge to someone with his experience. Inside, the bank was silent and shadowy. Lucas moved carefully through the teller area to Tucker's office. The desk had been cleared of blood, but dark stains still marked the wooden floor beside it. Lucas began a methodical search of the drawers, looking for anything that might connect Tucker to either the Donners or the mysterious Mrs. Lawrence. In the bottom drawer, beneath a false panel that his experienced fingers detected immediately, Lucas found what he was looking for: a small leather-bound ledger, separate from the official bank records. Inside were entries in a simple code, but one Lucas recognized from previous investigations. It was a record of money laundering, with dates, amounts, and initials rather than names. The most recent entry, dated just 3 days before the murder, showed a substantial sum $10,000 with the initials VL. Beside it, Lucas tucked the ledger inside his vest and continued his search. In a compartment behind one of the landscape paintings on the wall, he found a stack of letters tied with ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and the signature at the bottom of the top letter read, "With all my heart, Victoria. Victoria Lawrence." V.L. Lucas quickly scanned the letters. They revealed a romantic relationship spanning at least 6 months, with references to shared time in Denver and plans for the future. But the most recent letter took a different tone. "Franklin, you promised the arrangements were in place. My husband's associates are growing impatient. If the transaction is not completed by the 15th, they will take matters into their own hands, and neither of us will like the outcome. Remember what happened in Kansas City. Don't force me to involve others." The letter was dated just 2 weeks prior, around the time Mrs. Lawrence had visited Montana City. The sound of a key in the front door of the bank jolted Lucas from his reading. He quickly replaced the letters, locked the compartment, and moved silently toward the rear exit. Through the front window, he glimpsed Herbert Parsons entering with another man, Rafe Donner, the scarred outlaw Eliza had identified. Lucas slipped out the back door just as their voices became audible in the main room. Instead of leaving, however, he positioned himself beside the partially open window of Tucker's office, listening. "Don't care what you promised her," Rafe was saying, his voice harsh. "The school teacher is gone and that marshal knows too much. We need to finish this and clear out." "But the rest of the money," Parsons protested weakly. "Mrs. Lawrence said—" "Mrs. Lawrence isn't here, is she?" Rafe interrupted. "And Tucker's dead. So unless you know where he hid the other half of our payment, our business is concluded." "I don't, but there must be records." "If you'll just give me time to search." "Time's up, Parsons. My brother and I are leaving tonight. That marshal's too close to the truth. You'd be smart to do the same." "But what about the school teacher if she talks?" "Don't worry about her. We'll find her before we go. Wesley's tracking that marshal right now. He'll lead us straight to her." Lucas's blood ran cold. If Wesley Donner was following his trail, Eliza could be in danger sooner than he'd anticipated. He needed to warn her, but first he had to gather the rest of the evidence that would clear her name. Moving away from the bank, Lucas headed for the hotel, hoping Mrs. Abernathy had returned from church. He needed to know more about Victoria Lawrence and her connection to Tucker, and why they had chosen Eliza Sommers as their scapegoat. The hotel lobby was empty except for a plump, gray-haired woman arranging flowers at the front desk. She looked up as Lucas entered, her expression guarded. "Mrs. Abernathy," he inquired, showing his badge. "Marshal Calloway. I'd like to ask you about a recent guest, a Mrs. Lawrence." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned. "I run a respectable establishment, Marshal. I don't discuss my guests." "Madam, I'm investigating a murder. Your cooperation could prevent more bloodshed." The mention of murder softened her resolve slightly. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you can tell me about Mrs. Lawrence. When she arrived, how long she stayed, who she met with when she left, where she went." Mrs. Abernathy sighed. "She arrived on the stage from Denver, stayed 5 days, paid in advance with cash. Had several meetings with Mr. Tucker, some at the bank, some here in her room." Her disapproval was evident. She received callers at odd hours, though always well-dressed gentlemen, and she left suddenly, the day after Mr. Tucker was killed. "Did she say where she was going?" "Said she was returning to Denver on urgent business, but—" Mrs. Abernathy lowered her voice. "The stage driver told me later she only went as far as the junction, then took the eastbound train. Heading for St. Louis, he thought. Did she leave anything behind? Letters, papers, personal items?" Mrs. Abernathy hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "A book. Found it under the bed when cleaning her room. Put it aside thinking she might send for it, but she never did. May I see it? The woman disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a small, leather-bound volume. It wasn't a book, Lucas realized as she handed it to him, but a diary. Inside, the elegant handwriting matched the letters he'd found in Tucker's office. "I'll need to keep this as evidence," Lucas told her, tucking it into his vest alongside the ledger. "Mrs. Abernathy looked as if she might protest, then simply nodded. "Will there be anything else, Marshal? Just one thing. Did Mrs. Lawrence ever mention or meet with the school teacher, Miss Sommers? Not that I know of, though." Her brow furrowed. "She did ask about her once. Wanted to know if she was well-liked in town, how long she'd been here. Said she had a niece who might need a teaching position in the future." It wasn't much, but it confirmed that Victoria Lawrence had been aware of Eliza before the robbery. But why target her specifically? Lucas needed to read that diary, but first he had to ensure Eliza's safety. "Thank you for your help," he told Mrs. Abernathy. "If anyone asks about this conversation, especially the Donner brothers, I was inquiring about room rates." The woman's eyes widened slightly at the implied danger, but she nodded her understanding. Lucas exited the hotel through a side door, checking carefully for any sign of Wesley Donner. The streets were busy with after-church crowds, providing good cover as he made his way toward the livery stable. He needed to get back to Eliza as quickly as possible, warn her, and move her to a new location. Then he would return to confront the Donners and Parsons with the evidence he'd gathered. As he saddled his horse, a shadow fell across the stable entrance. Lucas's hand moved to his gun as he turned, but it was only Peterson, looking agitated. "Marshal," the telegraph operator called out, hurrying over. "Just got word from the junction. Sheriff wired ahead when Miss Sommers escaped, asking all stations to watch for her. They're sending territorial marshals to help with the search." Lucas cursed under his breath. More lawmen would complicate things. "When are they due to arrive?" "Tomorrow morning on the eastbound train." Peterson lowered his voice. "And there's more. Wesley Donner was asking all over town about you, where you're staying, when you were last seen. I think they know you helped Miss Sommers." Lucas finished saddling his horse. "Then I need to move fast. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me since yesterday." As Lucas rode out of town, he fought the sense of urgency that threatened to make him careless. Eliza was well hidden, he reminded himself. The cabin was off any established trail. But Wesley Donner was an experienced tracker, and if he picked up Lucas's trail... He took a circuitous route, crossing streams several times to break his trail and doubling back often to check for pursuers. It added hours to his journey, but by mid-afternoon, Lucas was confident he wasn't being followed. As he approached the final ridge before the cabin, however, something made him rein in his horse. An instinct born of years tracking outlaws sent a warning prickle down his spine. He dismounted, tied his horse in a dense thicket, and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the underbrush. At the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, Lucas paused, scanning the area carefully. Nothing seemed amiss. Smoke curled from the chimney. Despite his warnings, Eliza must have been cold, but otherwise, the clearing was undisturbed. He was about to step into the open when he caught a flash of movement to his left, sunlight reflecting off something metal. Lucas froze, then slowly turned his head. There, partially concealed behind a fallen log about 50 yards from the cabin, was a man with a rifle. Even from this distance, Lucas recognized Wesley Donner's distinctive red beard. Somehow the outlaw had found the cabin, and he was waiting, rifle trained on the door, for either Lucas or Eliza to emerge. Lucas weighed his options. He could try to circle around behind Donner, but the underbrush was thick, and he risked alerting the man to his presence. He could call out to warn Eliza, but that would give away his position and might prompt Donner to simply fire into the cabin indiscriminately. Before he could decide, the cabin door opened. Eliza stepped onto the small porch, a bucket in her hand, evidently intending to draw water from the nearby stream. Lucas saw Wesley adjust his aim. There was no time for subtlety. "Eliza, down!" he shouted, drawing his revolver and firing in one fluid motion. His shot struck the log inches from Wesley's head, sending splinters flying. Eliza dropped to the porch floor as Wesley returned fire, his rifle shot going wild. Lucas fired again, forcing Wesley to duck behind his cover. "Get back inside," he yelled to Eliza, who was crawling toward the cabin door. She made it inside as Lucas fired a third time, keeping Wesley pinned down. But he knew the outlaw's rifle had the advantage of range. He needed to get closer or find better cover. Lucas began moving laterally through the trees, trying to circle around to Wesley's position. The outlaw seemed to sense his strategy and fired in Lucas's direction, the bullet thudding into a tree trunk near his head. For several tense minutes, they exchanged shots, neither able to get a clear advantage. Lucas was down to his last 2 bullets when he heard a new sound: hoofbeats approaching fast from the direction of town. Both he and Wesley paused, listening. It could be Rafe Donner coming to his brother's aid, or it could be the sheriff's posse. Either way, Lucas needed to end this standoff quickly. Taking a calculated risk, he broke from his cover, sprinting toward a large boulder that would give him a better angle on Wesley's position. The outlaw fired, the bullet whistling past Lucas's ear as he dove behind the rock. From this new vantage point, Lucas could see Wesley more clearly. The outlaw was looking nervously over his shoulder at the approaching riders, clearly considering whether to flee or finish what he'd started. "It's over, Donner," Lucas called out. "I know about Victoria Lawrence and the money laundering operation. I have Tucker's ledger and her diary. You're finished." Wesley's face contorted with rage. "You don't know anything," he shouted back, raising his rifle. But before he could fire, 3 riders burst into the clearing: Sheriff Donovan and 2 deputies, guns drawn. "Drop it, Donner," the sheriff commanded. Wesley hesitated only a moment before throwing down his rifle. "This is a mistake, Sheriff," he said, raising his hands. "I was just hunting. Didn't know anyone was in that cabin." "With your reputation," Sheriff Donovan dismounted, keeping his shotgun trained on Wesley. "Not likely. Marshal Calloway wired me about finding you and your brother in town, said you might be connected to the bank robbery." Lucas emerged from behind the boulder, his revolver still pointed at Wesley. "He's connected, all right. He and his brother were hired to rob the bank and kill Tucker, and to frame Miss Sommers for it." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You got proof of that?" "Enough to hang him and his brother both," Lucas confirmed, "and to clear Miss Sommers' name." As if summoned by his words, Eliza appeared in the cabin doorway. "Sheriff Donovan," she called out, her voice remarkably steady, "I didn't kill Mr. Tucker. I didn't rob the bank. And Marshal Calloway can prove it." The sheriff looked from her to Lucas, then to the captured outlaw. His weathered face showed the conflict between his duty to bring in an escaped prisoner and the growing realization that he might have been pursuing the wrong suspect all along. "I think you'd better start explaining, Marshal," he said finally, "and it had better be good." 2 hours later, they were gathered in Sheriff Donovan's office in Montana City. Lucas, Eliza, the sheriff, Judge Harmon, and Mayor Wilson. On the desk between them lay the evidence Lucas had gathered: Tucker's secret ledger, Victoria Lawrence's diary, and the letters found in the banker's office. "So let me make sure I understand this," Judge Harmon said, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the documents. Franklin Tucker was involved in laundering money for a criminal organization based in St. Louis. This woman, Victoria Lawrence, was his connection to them. And his lover, Lucas added. According to her diary, they met in Denver last year when her husband sent her to establish banking connections for their operations. They began an affair, and Tucker agreed to help launder money through his bank. But why kill him? Mayor Wilson asked, his florid face betraying his shock at learning his friend and fellow businessman had been a criminal. Because he got greedy, Lucas explained. The last entries in the ledger show he was skimming from the money that passed through his hands. Mrs. Lawrence discovered it when she came to town 2 weeks ago. That's why she hired the Donners to recover the stolen funds and eliminate Tucker. Sheriff Donovan shook his head in disbelief. And they framed Miss Sommers because she was convenient, Lucas said, glancing at Eliza, who sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap. New to town, few connections, and most importantly, she had a connection to St. Louis that made her a perfect scapegoat. My father, Eliza said softly. When Mr. Tucker asked about correspondence from St. Louis, he must have been worried that his criminal associates might try to contact me, thinking I was somehow involved because of my father. Exactly, Lucas confirmed. Your father's academic reputation and his death made you the ideal person to frame. An unattached woman from St. Louis recently arrived in town with no one to vouch for her past. Judge Harmon set down the diary with a troubled expression. This is all very convincing, Marshal, but it's still circumstantial. We have Donner in custody, yes, but without Mrs. Lawrence or a confession. We have Parsons, Lucas reminded him. The teller was in on it. When I left him with Rafe Donner, they were discussing the missing money and what to do about Miss Sommers. With Wesley captured, Parsons will likely talk to save himself. The judge nodded thoughtfully. I'll authorize a warrant for Parsons's arrest, and for this Mrs. Lawrence, though I suspect she's long gone. She'll be found, Lucas assured him. The Treasury Department has been tracking this laundering operation for months. Once they know her role, they'll pursue her. Sheriff Donovan turned to Eliza. Miss Sommers, it appears I owe you an apology. It seems you've been the victim of a terrible injustice. Eliza acknowledged his words with a graceful nod. You were doing your duty as you saw it, Sheriff. I don't blame you for believing the evidence before you. Nevertheless, Mayor Wilson interjected, the town owes you more than an apology. Your reputation has been damaged, your position jeopardized. We must make amends. My reputation will recover, Eliza said with dignity. And as for my position, I hope the school board will allow me to return to my students. They are what I care about most. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. I think that can be arranged, and I will personally ensure that a full public statement is made regarding your innocence. As the meeting concluded, Lucas noticed Eliza's shoulders slump slightly, the only outward sign of the exhaustion and strain she must be feeling. Without thinking, he placed his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. It's over, he said quietly. You're free. Her fingers turned to lightly grasp his, a gesture of gratitude that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through him. Thanks to you, she murmured. Outside the sheriff's office, the afternoon sun bathed Main Street in golden light. Lucas and Eliza stood on the boardwalk, suddenly awkward in the aftermath of their shared ordeal. What happens now? Eliza asked, shielding her eyes from the sun as she looked up at him. Lucas adjusted his hat, buying time as he considered his answer. The logical next step was for him to leave, to continue his work tracking outlaws across the territories. That had been his life for years, moving from town to town, never staying long enough to form attachments. But something had changed in the past 3 days. Something about Eliza Sommers, her courage, her dignity in the face of injustice, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her students had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. "I need to escort Wesley Donner to Denver," he said finally, "and help coordinate the search for his brother and Mrs. Lawrence." "Of course," Eliza nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "You have your duties. But after that?" Lucas hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I thought I might come back through Montana City, if you wouldn't object to seeing me again." A slow smile spread across Eliza's face, transforming it in a way that made Lucas's breath catch. "I wouldn't object at all, Marshal Calloway." "Lucas," he corrected, returning her smile with one of his own. "I think after everything you might call me Lucas." "Lucas," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made him think that perhaps, for the first time in many years, he had found a reason to stop wandering. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Montana City. Herbert Parsons confessed to his role in the bank robbery, admitting he had helped the Donners access the vault and had planted the stolen money in Eliza's room at Mrs. Abbott's boarding house. In exchange for leniency, he provided information that led to the capture of Rafe Donner as he attempted to flee to Wyoming. Victoria Lawrence remained at large, but Treasury agents were closing in, following her trail through Denver to Chicago. The full extent of the money laundering operation was revealed to be much larger than anyone had suspected, with connections to criminal enterprises throughout the Midwest. For Eliza, life gradually returned to normal, though with subtle differences. Most townspeople were genuinely contrite about having believed the worst of her, and went out of their way to make amends. Mary Wilson, ashamed of her momentary doubt, became an even more loyal friend. The school board not only reinstated her position, but raised her salary as a gesture of apology. Yet despite these positive developments, Eliza found herself distracted, her thoughts often turning to Lucas Calloway. True to his word, he had departed with Wesley Donner in custody, promising to return when his duties allowed. But days had turned into weeks with no word, and Eliza began to wonder if she had misinterpreted his interest. Perhaps, she thought as she dismissed her students one warm September afternoon, he had simply been kind to a woman in distress. Perhaps his suggestion that he might return had been merely a polite farewell. Eliza was gathering her teaching materials when she heard the schoolhouse door open behind her. Assuming it was a student returning for a forgotten book, she didn't immediately look up. "School's over for the day," she said, arranging papers into a neat stack. "That's a shame. I was hoping for a lesson." The deep voice sent a jolt of recognition through her. Eliza turned quickly, her heart leaping at the sight of Lucas standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat trail-worn but very much real. "Lucas," she breathed, unable to keep the smile from her face. "You came back." He stepped into the schoolroom, his eyes never leaving hers. "I said I would. It's been almost a month," Eliza said, trying and failing to sound nonchalant. "I thought perhaps your duties had taken you elsewhere." "They did," he acknowledged. "Denver, Cheyenne, even as far as Omaha, tying up loose ends, making sure the case against the Donners was solid." He moved closer, setting his hat on one of the student desks. "But I found myself thinking about Montana City, about unfinished business here." Eliza's pulse quickened. "What sort of unfinished business?" Lucas was close enough now that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the small scar near his right eyebrow she hadn't noticed before. "The kind that makes a man reconsider his solitary ways," he said softly. "The kind that makes him wonder if perhaps it's time to stop drifting and put down roots." Hope bloomed in Eliza's chest, but she tempered it with caution. That's quite a change for a man who spent his life on the move. It is, Lucas agreed, but sometimes change is necessary. Sometimes a man meets someone who makes him want more than just the next job, the next town. His hand reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes he meets a woman who shows him what courage really looks like, and he can't get her out of his mind no matter how many miles he puts between them. Eliza felt a blush warm her cheeks. "And has this man considered what this woman might want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm hoping she might want the same thing," Lucas said, his fingers lingering against her cheek. A chance to see if what began in the worst of circumstances might flourish in better ones. Eliza leaned slightly into his touch, her heart full. "I think she would like that very much." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate as months of tension and unspoken feelings found their release. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably mention," he said with a hint of a smile, "that I've accepted a position as deputy sheriff here in Montana City. Sheriff Donovan is getting on in years, thinking of retiring. Says he could use a younger man with experience to help train his replacement." Eliza's eyes widened in delight. "You're staying, if that meets with your approval, Miss Sommers," he replied, his formal words belied by the warmth in his eyes. "It does indeed, Marshal Calloway," she answered, her arms still around his neck. "Very much so." Their second kiss was interrupted by a gasp from the doorway. They turned to find Mary Wilson standing there, her hand over her mouth, eyes dancing with surprised amusement. "Well," Mary said, recovering quickly, "I came to see if Eliza wanted to join me for tea, but I see she has other plans." Lucas stepped back slightly, though he kept one arm around Eliza's waist. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted her with a nod. "Marshal Calloway," Mary replied, her smile knowing. "How lovely to see you back in town. Permanently, I hope." "That's the plan," he confirmed. Mary beamed at them both. "Wonderful news. I'll just leave you to your reunion then. Eliza, perhaps tea tomorrow instead." After Mary departed, closing the schoolhouse door firmly behind her, Eliza couldn't help but laugh. "Well, that will be all over town by supper. Does that bother you?" Lucas asked, his expression turning serious. Eliza considered the question. A month ago, being the subject of town gossip would have horrified her, but she was different now, stronger, more certain of herself and her place in the world. "No," she decided. "Let them talk. After everything that's happened, a bit of happy gossip will be a welcome change." Lucas's smile returned. "I was hoping you'd say that." He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Now, I believe I was promised supper at Mrs. Abbott's boarding house. Something about her wanting to apologize properly for having doubted you." "And after supper?" Eliza asked, gathering her things with her free hand. Lucas's eyes held a promise that made her heart race. "After supper, I thought we might take a walk in the moonlight. I hear the view from the hill behind the church is particularly fine." As they left the schoolhouse together, Eliza felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the pain and fear of the past month had been leading to this moment, this man, this new beginning. The town that had once been ready to condemn her now spread before them, bathed in golden evening light, offering not judgment but possibility. And walking beside Lucas Calloway, her hand in his, Eliza Sommers knew that sometimes justice came in unexpected forms, and sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. Over the next 6 months, Montana City witnessed the steady courtship of Eliza Sommers and Lucas Calloway. It was conducted with proper decorum. Lucas called at Mrs. Abbott's parlor on Sunday afternoons, escorted Eliza to church socials, and took her for chaperoned rides in the countryside when the weather permitted. Yet beneath this propriety burned a deeper connection, forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal and strengthened by their growing understanding of each other. Lucas proved himself a capable deputy, earning the respect of the townspeople who had initially viewed him with suspicion. When Sheriff Donovan announced his retirement in February 1879, the town council unanimously appointed Lucas as his replacement. "Never thought I'd see the day when a drifting lawman would settle down in my town," Donovan remarked at the small ceremony where he handed over his badge. "But I can't think of a better man for the job." For Eliza, watching from the front row, the moment brought both pride and a touch of anxiety. Being the wife of a lawman for everyone in town, assumed that was where their courtship was heading, meant accepting a life of uncertainty, of knowing that each day could bring danger. Yet as Lucas's eyes found hers in the crowd, his smile containing a private message meant only for her, Eliza knew she wouldn't have it any other way. The man she had fallen in love with was defined by his sense of justice and his willingness to stand for what was right, even when it was difficult. Those were the very qualities that had saved her life. That evening, Lucas escorted her to a celebratory dinner at the hotel dining room, now Montana City's finest establishment. They were joined by Mary Wilson and her husband George, the mayor, along with several other prominent citizens who had become friends over the months. "A toast," Mayor Wilson proposed, raising his glass, "to our new sheriff. May your tenure be long and peaceful." "Hear, hear," came the chorus of agreement. Later, as Lucas walked Eliza back to Mrs. Abbott's boarding house through the crisp winter night, he seemed unusually quiet. "Is something troubling you?" Eliza asked, her breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. "You've been distracted all evening." Lucas slowed his pace, then stopped altogether beneath the bare branches of an elm tree, its silhouette stark against the star-filled sky. "Not troubled," he said, turning to face her. "Just thinking about how much has changed since I rode into Montana City last June." "For the better, I hope?" Eliza asked, studying his face in the silvery moonlight. "Beyond anything I could have imagined." He took both her gloved hands in his. "Eliza, when I came to this town, I was a man with no permanent connections, no place to truly call home. I'd been that way for so long I thought it was simply who I was meant to be." Eliza squeezed his hands encouragingly, her heart beginning to race as she sensed the direction of his words. "But then I met you," Lucas continued, his voice deepening with emotion. "Standing on that platform, facing a town that had turned against you, yet holding on to your dignity and your truth. And something in me recognized something in you, a kindred spirit, perhaps. Someone who understood what it meant to stand alone. We're neither of us alone anymore," Eliza said softly. "No, we're not, and I don't ever want to be again." Lucas released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Eliza Sommers, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making Montana City our home together?" Though she had anticipated this moment might come, the reality of it, Lucas standing before her, his eyes filled with love and hope, the small box containing a promise of their future, overwhelmed her. For a moment, she couldn't speak, could only nod as tears of joy welled in her eyes. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger over her glove. "The only thing of hers I've kept with me all these years." "It's beautiful," Eliza whispered, deeply touched by the sentiment of his offering this family heirloom. Lucas's kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally continued their walk to the boarding house, Eliza felt as though she were floating, the weight of her past trials lifted by the certainty of their shared future. Mrs. Abbott was waiting up for them, as was her custom when Eliza had an evening engagement. The landlady took one look at their glowing faces and the new ring on Eliza's finger and broke into a wide smile. "Well, it's about time," she exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace Eliza. "I've been saving a bottle of blackberry cordial for just such an occasion." As they shared a celebratory drink in Mrs. Abbott's cozy parlor, Lucas and Eliza began to discuss their plans. They would marry in the spring, when the mountain snows had melted and travel was easier for the few distant relatives they wished to invite. Lucas had already purchased land on the outskirts of town where he planned to build a house not large, but comfortable, with room for a garden and perhaps, someday, children. "And you'll continue teaching?" Lucas asked, knowing how much Eliza's students meant to her. "For as long as they'll have me," she confirmed, "though perhaps someday when we have children of our own." She blushed at her own presumption. Lucas's eyes softened with the image her words evoked. "Our children will have the finest teacher in the territory," he said, raising her hand to his lips. News of their engagement spread quickly through Montana City. For the most part, it was received with genuine happiness. The town had come to respect Lucas as their sheriff, and many still felt they owed Eliza a debt for having been so quick to condemn her the previous summer. There were, of course, a few whispered concerns about the propriety of her marrying a man so closely connected to her scandal, but these were quickly silenced by Mary Wilson's firm defense of the couple. "If anyone deserves happiness after what she endured, it's Eliza," Mary declared to the sewing circle where such gossip typically flourished. "And Sheriff Calloway is a good man who saw her worth when the rest of us were blind to it." The winter passed in a flurry of wedding preparations. Eliza, with Mary's help, sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory silk. Lucas, between his duties as sheriff, worked on their new home, hiring local carpenters but doing much of the finish work himself. In April, just as the first wildflowers began to bloom on the hillsides around Montana City, they exchanged vows in the white clapboard church, where, less than a year earlier, many of the same townspeople had prayed for justice to be served upon the murdering schoolteacher. The irony was not lost on either of them, but as Eliza walked down the aisle toward Lucas, who stood tall and proud in a new black suit, she felt only gratitude for the twisted path that had led them to each other. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Mitchell began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Lucas James Calloway and Eliza Jane Sommers in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When they exchanged rings, Lucas receiving a plain gold band that Eliza had saved for months to purchase, many in the congregation were wiping away tears, touched by the evident love between the couple whose story had become something of a local legend. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Mitchell concluded. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Lucas's kiss was perhaps a bit more passionate than strictly proper for a church ceremony, but no one seemed inclined to object. The celebration that followed at the hotel was the most festive event Montana City had seen in years. The entire town seemed to have turned out to wish them well, bringing gifts and dishes for the communal feast. Even Judge Harmon, who had nearly sentenced Eliza to trial for murder, offered a heartfelt toast to the couple's happiness. As the evening wore on, Lucas drew Eliza away from the crowded hotel dining room onto the quiet balcony overlooking Main Street. The spring air was crisp but not cold, carrying the promise of the summer to come. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they gazed at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. "Are you happy?" Eliza leaned back against his solid warmth, a contentment unlike anything she'd ever known filling her heart. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "A year ago, I was alone in the world, teaching in a town where I knew no one, and now—" Lucas prompted, his breath warm against her ear. "Now I have a husband I love beyond measure, a home we've built together, and a future filled with possibility." She turned in his arms to face him. "What more could I want?" Lucas's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I ask myself the same question every day. How did a solitary marshal with nothing to his name but a badge and a horse end up with a woman like you?" "By being exactly the man you are," Eliza told him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "The man who believes in justice and truth. The man who wasn't afraid to stand alone against an entire town." Their kiss deepened, the sounds of the celebration fading as they lost themselves in each other. It was only the discreet cough of Mayor Wilson, coming to find them for the cutting of the wedding cake, that finally separated them. "I believe you're needed inside," he said with an amused smile. "Though I hate to interrupt such a charming moment." As they followed him back to the reception, Lucas kept Eliza's hand firmly in his. "Just a little longer," he whispered, "and then we can begin our real life together." Their new home, though not completely finished inside, was ready enough for them to spend their first night as husband and wife beneath its roof. Lucas had worked tirelessly to ensure the bedroom was perfect, with a handcrafted bed frame he'd made himself and quilts sewn by the women of the town as a wedding gift. As he carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, Eliza laughed with pure joy, the sound echoing through the rooms that would soon be filled with the memories of their life together. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness of their marriage bed, Eliza marveled at how completely her life had transformed. From the darkest moment of facing a hangman's noose for a crime she didn't commit, she had found her way to this, a love deeper and more profound than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How strange life is," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest above his heart. "How the worst day of my life led me to you." "I've thought the same," he admitted. "If I hadn't been tracking the Donners, if I hadn't ridden into Montana City exactly when I did." The possibility was too painful to contemplate. Instead, Eliza raised herself on one elbow to look down at her husband's face, memorizing every detail in the moonlight filtering through the curtainless windows. "But you did," she said simply. "You came when I needed you most. And now we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." "The rest of our lives," Lucas repeated, drawing her down for a kiss that held all the promise of their future. "Mrs. Calloway, I believe that sounds just about perfect." 5 years later, Lucas stood on the front porch of their expanded home, watching as Eliza helped their 3-year-old son, James, feed the chickens in the yard. Their 1-year-old daughter, Sarah, was balanced on his hip, her tiny fingers playing with the badge pinned to his vest. Montana City had grown considerably since their wedding day. The railroad had finally reached them, bringing new businesses and settlers. The schoolhouse where Eliza had once taught had been replaced by a larger building, and she now served as headmistress, overseeing 3 teachers. Lucas himself had been elected county sheriff last year, a position that kept him busier than he sometimes liked, but allowed him to continue the work he believed in, upholding justice and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Life wasn't always peaceful. There had been difficult times, a fire that nearly destroyed the town's commercial district, A harsh winter that had claimed several lives. The regular challenges of maintaining law in a growing frontier community. But through it all, Lucas and Eliza had faced each trial together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. "Papa, look," James called out, holding up an especially large egg he'd just collected. "Is it a dragon egg?" Lucas chuckled. "I think it's just from Mrs. Henderson's Plymouth Rock hen, son, but it's a fine egg nonetheless." Eliza came up the path, her face flushed from the morning sun, carrying a basket of eggs. Even after years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip a beat. She had only grown more beautiful to him with time. Her honey-brown hair now streaked with subtle gold from hours spent gardening, laugh lines beginning to form at the corners of her bright eyes. "Any news from St. Louis?" she asked, referring to the ongoing case against Victoria Lawrence and her husband's criminal organization, which had finally been brought to trial. "Telegram came this morning," Lucas confirmed. "Guilty on all counts, 20 years in prison for both of them." Eliza nodded with satisfaction. Justice at last, indeed. Lucas shifted Sarah to his other arm as she began to fuss. "Though it took long enough." "Justice often does," Eliza reminded him, setting down her basket to take their daughter. "But it comes eventually if good people stand for what's right." It was a philosophy they had both lived by, and one they were teaching their children. James, already showing signs of his father's strong sense of fairness, and Sarah, too young yet for such lessons but who would grow up knowing her mother's story of courage and vindication. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lucas and Eliza sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. This had become their ritual, these quiet moments at day's end when they could simply be together, sharing the small details of their day and their hopes for tomorrow. "Mary Wilson stopped by the school today," Eliza mentioned, her head resting comfortably on Lucas's shoulder. "She's organizing a harvest festival next month and wants us to help." Lucas murmured, his arm around her waist, holding her close. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't come to Montana City when I did?" Eliza considered this. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then, I remember something my father used to say, that life has its own logic, even when we can't see it. That the threads of our existence weave together in patterns beyond our understanding." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," Lucas observed. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Eliza said with certainty. "He valued honesty and integrity above all else, just as I do." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight, "Just as our children will." Lucas leaned in to kiss her, a gesture that even after 5 years of marriage still held the same wonder and passion as their first embrace. "I love you, Eliza Calloway," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you, Lucas Calloway," she returned. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." As they sat together in the growing darkness, the lights of Montana City twinkling below them, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible day on the courthouse platform to this peaceful evening on their porch, every step, even the painful ones, had led to this life they had built together. A life of justice served and love found, of trials overcome and joy embraced. A life that had begun with the words of a stranger who dared to stand against a town's rush to judgment. "I know who really did it." Words that had saved her life, and in saving it, had given her so much more than mere survival. They had given her Lucas, their children, their home, their future, a future as boundless and bright as the star-filled Montana sky stretching endlessly above them.